Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to my Patreon live stream for March 2021. Today, I'm going to be coloring a pub that I had designed. And I want you guys to feel free to ask any questions in the chat. And, if you need me to clarify anything as I'm going, definitely let me know. So, I drawn this pub design as part of a building series I've been sort of working on the side. This is the fourth building I've designed. I'm trying to keep them all within the same theme and feel, and I'm going to share how I kind of come to that look and process of how I get there. So just briefly want to point out I had originally done this mood board I put together before I started to draw the pub, and simply just grabbing images from Pinterest and Google image search, looking for unique stores and unique pubs and things like that, and just to kind of give me a flavor for what the architecture could look like. I sort of do this hybrid of real world look to my buildings, but I'm also keeping a little bit of fantasy element to them. So anyway, it's just good to have some reference to look at just for certain details and color schemes and things like that. The one I'm really focusing on for colors is this one that has the black trim with the white. I kind of like that. It's got some gold accents that I might look at doing. I also like the red trim on this one with the windows. That one's got some cool stuff going on there. So I wanted to have a pop of color. I'm thinking adding some red. This general store sort of showcases some of that red color as well. So that's just something I'm kind of keeping in mind before I color, is that sort of general idea. Things can change while I go, but what I did was I put together a palette of colors that, I've already done 3 of these buildings, so I kind of have a general idea of sort of the shades and tones that I'm going for. So I picked some of the colors from other buildings that I've done and modified a few of them just to sort of work with the scheme I'm thinking of for this one. So I had already selected the outside and made a quick flat sort of mask, if you will. But I'm going to show you how I do that anyway, just to kind of go over it. It might be rudimentary for most people, but also I'm in Clip Studio Paint. It's what I exclusively color and draw in now. So it's Clip Studio Paint Pro is what I have. So one thing I had done, I did a quick color study just to sort of see how some of these colors might work. So looking at sort of the whitish color, I don't want to go straight white, so I have this sort of beige color here. And I'm thinking like that reference I'd shown with the dark trim. So not going straight like black color or anything like that, because I don't want to lose my line art. That's sort of important. It's for the look I want to be able to see the line art through. So I'm not going to go darker than the line art, and I have to sort of take into consideration that I'm going to be applying shadow on top of this, so it's going to darken it even further. So and then I have a textured layer that I add on top, which is going to darken it up even more. The texture layer I have is a combination of like a few things, and it sort of applies. I'll show you the texture layer, kind of what it's going to do to the colors. So it just does that, and so it's slightly darker than, so I have to keep that in mind, and I'll be flicking that layer on and off throughout just to sort of see how everything's coming together. But I have to understand that once I apply this for the final, it's going to change the colors. So I just need to keep that in mind. So I have that just off for now while I'm doing my flat. So I color in couple stages here. So the first thing I do is I flat my colors. I use a hard brush. I use the G pen. I always make sure that the anti-aliasing is turned all the way off. And I don't want to have any smooth lines. I don't know if you can see here, so they're very pixelated hard line. Just when I'm doing my flats, it's easier once I want to adjust any colors later on if I have all my flats that I can just easily grab with the wand, and I don't have to leave any little artifacts behind. If I had aliasing turned on, it would have artifacts if I tried to grab with the wand tool, and I don't want that. So, okay, so the other thing I did was, so I did my quick color study just to see how these colors are going to work, and I did a shadow layer on top just really quick, just to sort of see how that's going to work with the contrast. Again, these are things I might adjust later on, but it gives me a general start of how it's going to look when I'm done, and it gives me the confidence to just kind of plow ahead. So, like I said, I'd already done this quick flat of everything, but basically I'll just go to my line art layer. I have my wand selected. I have, you can kind of see the check marks I have here. I close the gaps quite a bit. I have that turned up to 40. I find that closing the gaps is really helpful in this program. It's something that you can't do in Photoshop. It's one of the reasons I love coloring in Clip Studio. So I apply to connected pixels only, and I will just select outside of the area, and then I do inverse. So I just Control Shift I to do an inverse on that, and then I can pick one of my colors. I'm just going to pick the ground color and throw that in. So there is a few areas that didn't get grabbed, but on my paint bucket, I also have that with the anti-aliasing turned off, and apply to connected pixels only. So I can still fill this even though there's a little gap here, because I have the close gap set to 20 for that. It won't go outside that. So it's just a quick way to just go in and fill in some of these areas like that in there. Okay, so I'm not going to go through doing the whole thing just because I already did it. And let's get into the flatting. Okay, so another thing to do is I sort of think about building my colors up, and if I work from like the ground up. So I'm going to lay down the stone colors, and then I'll lay down like the basic beige for like the building, because that's going to be underneath the wood, and just start throwing the colors on there. So one other handy thing you can do, and it's not going to work for all the flatting here. So first thing I do is I lock my layer. Once I have the outside flatted, I lock it with the lock transparent pixels so that I don't end up painting outside of that area. And I'm going to have my area scaling turned up to 2 on the fill bucket, and I'm going to turn on refer multiple layers. And what this is going to do is it's going to be able to paint within the line art that's on another layer. So that'll be really handy just for doing these stones real quick. I'm just going to drop this in. So sometimes if I'm doing like a comic page, when it comes to flatting, I have a flatter that I hire, because this process is usually very time consuming, especially if I'm doing a comic page. And so I'll pay a flatter to do that. Typically, unless I have the color scheme already worked out for them, I'm not going to get the colors to be perfect by any means, but I'm not worried about that. I just want the colors separated. And just one other quick thing I want to mention. So just like everything else, when I'm using my G pen to help flat, I make sure the anti-aliasing is turned off. So I'm just going to quickly fill. I know that the paint underneath is going to be white there, so I'm just going to draw it in. I can do this with the lasso tool too if I wanted. And when I fill, I want to make sure I take off the refer multiple layers. Just drop that in. I think that's all the white. Also have the trees in behind. So anything that's kind of like in behind, I'm going to try to flat. So Joe's asking about achieving the same flats in Photoshop. I mean, I certainly can achieve flats in Photoshop. I think it's just Clip Studio has a few features like closing the gaps and area scaling that just sort of make flatting process go faster for me. So I used to use Photoshop all the time back in the day, so I certainly have done my share of flatting. I just found that this program, once I started getting into it, was just way faster and had just implemented more cool features to make it quicker. I'm not even sure what program my flatter uses. You might use Photoshop, I don't know. So again, it's just a matter of building the layers up. And once I have my flat colors, the good thing about flats are if you keep your flats, you can create another layer with just your flats and save them. And then you can always go back in and grab areas and then you can recolor it really easily. So I find that just really handy because I'm someone who, when I color, I spend a lot of time adjusting colors, especially if I'm starting a new project and I haven't established a palette. I'll spend a lot of time just tweaking. My sense of color isn't fantastic, so I think that's why I end up struggling a little bit there. Just gonna do this trim, this concrete. And feel free to ask questions, anyone, as I'm going here. I'm not great at rambling, so if you want to keep me yapping, it's a good way to do it. I think I can move on to my trim now. So Brian's asking if I flat on the same layer. And then just select the color to adjust the hue. Yeah, that's right. So I do all my flats on the same layer. pretty much for the most part. Sometimes if I'm doing something that's got like a background, I'll keep the background separate from the foreground objects, like a sky or something like that. But typically I like to just keep all my flats on one layer. Have I been approached to do character designs for cartoon shows? I see many artists posting of their new jobs. Yes, I have. I've designed for a few shows, but nothing that has come out, or I don't think that anything that's being made. Part of the downside to freelancing, stuff like that, is sometimes you end up doing artwork that no one will ever see outside of the studio, so and I'm not allowed to post it, so kind of a bummer when you work on something, especially if it's something you're proud of and you kind of want to be able to share with people. But yeah, it's one of those things. It's fun to work on some of these shows, and sometimes it's, designing characters and things that you grew up loving in your childhood, so it's cool to get like sort of a chance to put your spin on those characters. But you typically, like a bigger show, like a bigger studio, will have multiple artists doing that, so the chances of even like your particular artwork ending up in a show, for the style guide is rare. I did have sort of indirectly designed stuff for when I designed Marvel Superhero Adventures. Those designs ended up getting turned into like a web series, and now that show is on Disney Plus, so it was kind of nice to use my my artwork, my original artwork for the toy line, for the cover art for the show, so it's kind of cool that I get to see my artwork pop up on the Disney Channel. The transition to Photoshop, from Photoshop to Clip Studio, wasn't too bad. I typically sort of don't like learning new programs. I'm just technically not, I get frustrated, but Clip did enough things similar to Photoshop that I found the transition wasn't too bad. So there's so many tutorials now available for learning certain functions. If there's a function you did in Photoshop, most likely Clip Studio has that function. So just with a search of YouTube, you can find a tutorial that'll show you how to do it. I'm still learning. I've been, the last couple weeks, I've been spending, when I work out and do exercise on my elliptical, I put tutorials for Clip Studio on my TV, just so I have something to I can learn a little bit, because there's so much in a program typically that I end up like just skipping over because it's not natural, or I just don't know exactly how to do it, so I avoid it. So somebody picking up RuneWorld, you mean for like a show? I can't really speak on it, but attempts have been made. I'll say that. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't like to get my hopes up. The one thing I know is that from working on other shows and things like that, is how easily a show can get canceled before it ever sees the light of day. Projects in general, like toy design projects, things like that. So many of those projects that I work on never saw the light of day. it's kind of a bummer, but it's part of the process. I've designed like whole toy lines that just never came out. Yeah, I would love to see a Rune World cartoon series on like a Netflix or something, like an episodic. I think that'd be amazing. When I originally drew the comic, I had sort of television in mind as I was writing it and drawing it. That's how it would kind of play out in my head. Typically when I'm doing comics, I think about my comics as movies or TV shows. It's just kind of like I try to visualize it in a cinematic way, and it helps me sort of wrap my brain around the thing. Yeah, one of the coolest things about doing toy designs and things like that, and being able to work for Marvel or DC doing sort of branding design work, is being able to see your stuff pop up on a toy shelf, or because I have children, so we've, I mean, they don't really care, but we'll walk into a toy store and Dad's artwork's on the shelf, so it's kind of cool. And we've bought in pajamas and things like that with my artwork on it for them, so it's kind of like a cool thing. But for them, they don't really care. It's to them, every dad draws. They don't look at it as a special thing. Actually, Brian, I've seen a couple of your tutorials popping up on my Clip Studio when I'm searching for Clip Studio tutorials. So that's really cool that you're out making those, because I think that's like super helpful. Definitely I have to check out some of those. I'm sure I can learn a few things from you. The as far as like ones I can recommend, I should probably do a post. I can't think of the person off the top of my head. They were doing tutorials for Clip Studio, but also through Wacom, and they had some nice tutorials. I learned a few things about the perspective ruler that I didn't know, and about drawing with vectors, which is something I've sort of recently just started figuring out. I don't typically draw in vectors now, but when I was doing some pin designs for my upcoming Kickstarter, I was trying my best to sort of learn how to do vectors, and it's quite a handy thing. I need to do it more though, just to kind of probably make it part of my regular drawing repertoire. But the features are really cool. Do you have the voices of your in your head for each character? I don't know if I typically have a voice in my head for my characters. I tend to I think of the cinematics, but I don't know. Maybe because I can't do voices myself. I'm horrible at it, so maybe that's why. But they all just kind of have my same voice, I guess. So the interesting thing about coloring, like the flattening process literally is the longest part of my process for coloring, because since I break everything down into like flats and then shadows, shading, and then the texture and highlights, like that stuff is going to come together like super fast. And that's why, like, if I'm doing a comic book page, I pay a flatter to flat that page, because the time it saves me, I can just go in and throw in, adjust all the colors. I'd probably spend like a few hours adjusting colors, but then it's just a matter of quickly throwing in shadows and lighting, and it can come together so much faster, because this is, as you're kind of witnessing right now, this is sort of tedious. So tell you more about my art book in the Kickstarter. So yeah, I'm launching my next art book. Is going to be launched on April 5th. I've been working hard to put that book together since I started back in November putting it together, but I had a lot of art that I still needed to do for it, expanding on other designs and sort of fleshing out the book. And I'm almost done. This illustration is actually going in the book. It's one of the last ones I needed to put in, so I thought it was good timing to sort of do the live stream, and then I'll have it done for the book. The book itself is going to be same dimensions and page count as my last creations and all my other art books. It's going to be the same vein as the last Creations book. So Creations is my series where it's all my own art. Most of you probably know I sort of distance myself a bit away from fan art. I still do some fan art from time to time, but I sort of have focused a lot more on my own IPs, and it's just been something that's been fulfilling, that people will actually support my art when it's my own creations and not just a familiar character. And yeah, so the art book's got a lot of character designs. It's got a lot of background work. I tend to if I like a design, I find it fun to like take that character and draw them in multiple poses and expressions, and it just helps me really kind of wrap my head around the character more than just drawing one single image of them. And I find it's great content for my art books, so it's sort of a nice process that sort of itches and scratches all that stuff. So also I'm going to have, for the Kickstarter, I'm going to have like bundles available like I normally do. I'm going to have exclusive, well, not exclusive necessarily, but limited edition pins that I'm making for Bot9 and Pogo and Rex from RuneWorld. So I have, I'm going to have tiers available that you can like sort of add those pins on. Also, this time for Kickstarter, they've included add-on items, which is going to be really helpful for people who just want to add on something, especially if you've supported before and there's something specific. One of the main issues I have with Kickstarter in the past is that, you know, if you're a supporter of something and, you know, and then I put together a bundle and it's got something you want but you already have one of the other items, it's a bit of a pain. But now you can just add on items, so that'll just make things a lot easier. Okay, so see if I miss any questions here. Proportions and perspective are my Achilles heel, and 3D assets are very helpful for problem solving. Yeah, so Matt's saying about perspective and stuff. So perspective definitely is a hard thing sometimes to wrap your head around. I was fortunate enough to learn about perspective in art school, and kind of they drive it into your head pretty hard. So, but I'll still use the perspective rulers and things like that from time to time in Clip Studio. I find it super helpful. And some of them, when you can, like when you're able to lock to the perspective, you can really sketch out, like say a quick background of just showing, like putting the geometric shapes in there to give yourself a guide. I find that just super helpful. So for this particular one, I didn't use perspective ruler. I've already established sort of a basic. This is almost like an isometric kind of grid that I just kind of drew out. So there's not a lot of vanishing points going on here. It's more of an ISO drawing. So I don't really have to worry about too many vanishing points, anything like that. Yeah, so I'm for sure doing the pins. The designs are done. It's just a matter of seeing how many people are interested during the campaign, and then how many I get to order. I'm hoping enough people are interested that I can order a bunch and kind of bring the cost down, because I find if you're only printing 100 pins, it's pretty pricey. So I kind of want to avoid paying the really hefty costs, but we'll see. We'll see how it does. Another thing about the Kickstarter that a lot of people, I don't know if people know or not. I mean, you guys can let me know in the comments. But so I live in Canada, and even though most of my backers are in the U.S. and other places, I don't have the option to choose U.S. dollars. So the Canadian dollar is actually quite a bit cheaper, it's worth less than a US dollar, so by about 30 cents. So you can get, if you're paying, especially if you live in the US, my books are 30% cheaper pretty much when you buy them from my Kickstarter, because of the Canadian dollar. So it's kind of a bummer I don't make as much money as I normally would somebody else, but it's nice you can give people a bit of a deal. I just don't know if people recognize that it's Canadian dollars when they get there. Because I know the Kickstarter sort of will tell you what your country's currency is, and they'll sort of put it there. Maybe you can see that and more inclined to buy. But I forgot to do this bush in behind here. I've really had a good time designing the pins, and I would like to do more in the future, so I'm hoping people want them. It's kind of like it's sort of like, I don't know, kind of feels to me like almost like designing a toy. I would love to make toys of my work, but that's just crazy expensive to make. So my Kickstarter, another thing about just running a Kickstarter, the process to put one together is pretty time consuming. I usually spend about 2 weeks of time putting it together, like probably works out to be like solid weeks. And not sure why that is not closing in. Huh. It's weird. Any other books I'm working on? So I've been struggling to find time to really dive into a project, but I feel like I'm closer than I've ever been to starting another project. I'm sort of been trying to free up time from my freelance schedule to allow myself time to really dive into a book. I found it's a struggle for me when I have too many freelance projects to juggle and then try to spend any time on a book, because comics for me, like, they're just so time consuming, and that I need to be able to hyper focus on them if I'm going to make any real progress. I find a lot of it is about momentum, and I just really haven't had the time. I've been designing the characters, which I've, for a few ideas, so I'll be able to at least hit the ground running once I get things up and running, I guess. But yeah, I've been itching to do something. I just have to have time now to sit down and write. I think that's my next step. I have a lot of just half-baked ideas on the go, but I need to really focus. So the advantage of laying on separate versus one layer, I just find that for me it doesn't really matter if my flats are all contained, and I'm not worrying about aliasing and things like that. As long as I can grab the base color from it, I'm fine. I mean, you can have multiple layers. That's something you can do, but so something I'm noticing this board is wonky. One of the things sometimes when I'm in the middle of painting this stuff is I start to see the flaws. Just quickly can fix this. So my freelance projects, so every single freelance project I've had since I started freelancing has come from people finding me on social media. So I've yet to have to really reach out. Luckily, in this day and age, I think a lot of art directors just follow people. And then if a certain project comes up that matches something you're drawing, I recently got approached to do a project based on these actual buildings I've been drawing, but I turned it down because I need to focus on. I want to focus on my comic next, so sometimes just got to make those tough choices. But I think it would be cool to do a project drawing buildings all the time, although it might get boring. But yeah, so like a lot of people will ask advice, like where they can, find freelance work or post. But I'd say your best bet really is to, post on social media and, but I don't really know the other avenues, unfortunately. I got lucky that I was able to build a following sort of before, Instagram and really kind of took off as a place. Now it's kind of flooded, I guess, with artists, and maybe it's a little bit harder. I know the algorithms have changed a lot and it's harder for people to get their pages noticed, but I maybe just hit a sweet spot at the time and just sort of was able to build up a following, but it's certainly slowed down over the years. So why is making comics so hard? I think people maybe assume that comics are easy. I don't know. If they've said if anybody says comics are easy, they've never made comics. I mean, you're especially if you're writing and drawing and coloring it. You're everything. Like you're the director, you're the writer, you're the storyboard artist. You're filling all the roles. So if you want it to be of a certain quality, it's you have to pour everything into it, and it's hard. Even all my other projects have always been sort of juggling freelance while working on them. I know, like Rune World was when I was trying to hit the schedule once it was published by Boom, and they kind of wanted to get the books out on a certain schedule. I was killing myself to get those books done, and I don't know, it's stressful. Okay, let's just kind of see how this is looking. So far so good. Flats are almost done here. Yeah, the repurposing of content on other platforms for social media, I've found that like the reality is of social media, if you post something, I think in your head you assume that everybody sees it, and that is not the case. Algorithms make sure that that's not the case, and also just people follow multiple people, like, you know, hundreds, thousands, you know, some people just follow multiple people, and you know, your feed gets flooded, and how often are you checking? You're not spending, you know, necessarily all day looking through every single person's post. So the reality is, and you just sort of think about it this way, most people are not going to see your post. So if you post that post multiple times, it can become helpful to actually get your message out there, or just get your artwork out there. I know it can be a little bit sort of, I don't know, it just feels weird to post, you know, say multiple images. I try to spread them out. So say I posted something, and maybe a month later I'll post that same image again, just because, you know, it sort of spreads it out. I'm not posting back-to-back days. The stories and things like that kind of help for that. You can, because they just disappear. So, you know, if you're gonna sort of blast out the same drawing a few times, you can do it in something like a story. And same with tweets. I mean, tweets are kind of flighty anyway, so I don't really worry too much about, you know, posting something multiple times on Twitter, because Twitter, everything just gets kind of lost in the void after you post it. So yeah, I mean, making comics under pressure is definitely a better way to get it done. Like I found, like having that deadline is super important to sort of push through the times, the sort of creative roadblocks and things like that. I remember for like issue 4 of Rune World, I'd written myself into a corner, and I needed to get the characters sort of on their path so I could wrap up the series. And you know, you just sort of, sometimes when you're plotting out your books, you just say, okay, characters are going to go from here to there. But when it comes down to the page, you're like, oh yeah, I need to actually, you know, dialogue needs to happen that actually like gets these characters on their path. Situations need to happen. So sort of being a bit of a novice at the time, that was the first thing I'd ever written. And I definitely had written myself into a corner. But I was able to figure it out, but it was under pressure that I was able to do that. So just inside this window, I have sort of a hint of little tables and chairs and things inside the pub. So I'm just sort of taking the sort of light tone. I don't want to really emphasize what's going on inside these buildings too much, but just kind of like a hint. So I'm just going to use a slightly darker color than the lighted window, sort of highlight some of the little features that are in there. I think I watched that South Park documentary. They go through. Was that the one where they show them making an episode, sort of in a span of a few days? I think it's pretty crazy what they can do. But yeah, having that pressure just really helps. It sort of when you have the pressure, it forces you to not second guess every decision, and that can be sort of like a big roadblock for most people. I know for me it is. When I have endless sort of time to consider and mull over ideas, I end up convincing myself that every idea is bad, and then I sort of, avoid progress that way. But sometimes you need that fire, I guess, to get lit under you. But I guess that's the danger with when I'm self-publishing things, is that the only deadline is the one I set for myself. So you can fall into a trap of just putting things off, or saying that that's not good enough right now, or I'm just not feeling it, or whatever, and you just sort of put it on the back burner. And I've been doing that for a while, but I sort of have to figure out how to not do that. Keep the questions coming if you guys have them. It's easier to ramble when I have something to talk about specifically. Okay, so let's see here. Just quickly do this railing. What is Bubble and Squeak? I actually don't know. My friend is from Britain, and I heard him talk about it. I'm not actually sure what it is, but when I showed him that I put it into this pub, he thought it was funny. So I don't know. Anybody's British out there and they know what it is, feel free to tell everybody in the chat. Marvel United board game. I think I've seen that. Definitely cool. I think it's chibi-like. I think I had some people ask me if I worked on it, actually, but I didn't. Okay, so I think I have most things flatted now. So I'm gonna get into a few other things. So for some reason I've been putting my highlights for my leaves on a separate layer, so I'm just going to continue to do that here. So another thing just to think about, just getting back to the coloring a little bit. My light source for this building, I've decided is going to be coming sort of this way. So I have to think about sort of like this area is going to be shadow, like these areas are going to be shadow, over here is going to be in shadow. And I'm going to be casting kind of like shadow in here, casting shadow like sort of down in there. So as I'm just sort of doing my leaves here, I'm just going to be putting the light kind of coming this way on the leaves. So actually, a couple of those Funko Pop games, there was a couple that I did some cover art for, or designed, but my experience working with the company that was sort of doing it, it wasn't Funko who was doing the games. It wasn't the greatest, and I ended up bowing out, so I don't know. I think they ended up using some of the designs for the covers of some of the, I think it was like a Batman one or a Harry Potter one or something. I can't remember now, it's been a while. I used to collect Funko Pops pretty intensely about 4 years ago, and ended up selling my collection on eBay. I think it's been about 2 years now. It got to a point where I had no more space for them. I had like, I think about 350 of them. So it was kind of getting out of hand. So one of the things I've been thinking about when it comes to my next comic project is that I'm thinking about doing a Kickstarter for it at some point once I kind of get it further underway. I want to be at least, I think, 75% done before I approach Kickstarter. I don't like the idea of going to Kickstarter to fund the book. I know that other artists have kind of gotten into trouble. In the way that freelance goes, sometimes opportunities come along that you can't say no to, and then you end up delaying your personal projects for them. So I want to make sure that the comic's far enough along that I'm convinced I can get it done by a certain period of time. I'm not a fan of Kickstarters that don't deliver on time. Something I try to pride myself on is to make sure everything's done. So like my art books will be, pretty much completed by the time my Kickstarter starts, so that by the time the Kickstarter ends, I can send it off to the printer and get everybody their books on time. So I want to do the same type of thing for the Kickstarter. So any art goals that I haven't fulfilled yet? I'd say probably, having animated series or movie based on my work would be a nice goal for the future. And I think just as far as goals come now, I just want to create more of my own properties. I was really proud of RuneWorld. I was really proud of Bot9. It's a sort of some of the most fulfilling things I've done creatively, and I want to have more of that feeling. So and I think for longevity, I'm 43, and I guess I think about the future and having kind of more avenues for passive income as sort of I decline, and get older and won't be able to work as much. It'd be nice to have sort of a library of work that can generate passive income and sort of, keep you out there even when your capacity to make stuff isn't as good anymore. So I don't know. It sort of feels weird to think like that, but I do have family I need to think about that I support, so that's something I want in the future, I guess. So that'd be a good goal. Okay, so it's time for the shadow layer. So I'm using a watercolor texture brush. I'm hoping to make another layer for my shadows. So I'm going to just I'm going to keep my flats down there, and I can just adjust when I need to any colors. Now that they're there, I have little green highlights on another layer, and once the shadow starts going on, I find that the drawing really starts to come to life when you add the depth to it. So let's see how this goes. I want to make sure that my layer is set to clip to the layer below, so everything that I'm drawing on top of here is going to stay within the flat layer contained. Let's see. So okay, so this brush I have is called Walter Wet. I'm not sure where it came from, but I guess I'd gotten a brush pack at some point. I'm not great at remembering where I get these things from. And it's probably bad for me to not remember, but this brush has a little bit of texture. Another thing I need to do, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, is just sort of throw my shadow layer on here, or my texture layer. I'm just turning it on just so I can see. So the one thing about this brush, I'm using the watercolor brush to do the shadows with, and it sort of helps give this whole image a more watercolor feel. Because if I lift the brush off, it's going to reapply a little bit extra paint sort of underneath, and sort of gives it, like, you can kind of see in the, if we go a bit closer, you can kind of see, let's say, kind of gives it a little more texture. So I try not to lift my brush if I want to keep a nice consistent tone going. For now, I'm going to paint over my windows, even though the light will probably shine through, but I don't know if I need it to fully shine through there. So just by doing this, I can add a little bit of stain sort of look. And just think of the cast shadows a little bit on these pieces. The comic with about the guy with the blue hair and the giant sword, that's a drawing I did a long time ago. The comic idea I had for that was actually quite dark, maybe too dark, so I ended up shelving it. I get torn sometimes between if I should do sort of more kid-friendly stuff, especially because I have kids. I kind of wonder if I need to do stuff that's going to appeal to them, that I feel comfortable showing them when they pop into my office. But I have had a lot of ideas for a little bit more, slightly more adult content, so we'll see. A couple of the ideas that I've been kicking around lately are more in that vein. It's just a matter of how far to take it, but that's something I need to just kind of figure out as I go. But I'm definitely thinking more along the lines of something more adult for my next project. So do I share my brushes? So here's the thing about sharing brushes. If I've created a brush, I don't mind sharing it. If I have a brush that I got from another library, I feel weird about sharing it with people, just because I didn't make that brush, and you guys sort of essentially pay for it through the Patreon. So I don't know, feels weird to me. So I kind of I think what I need to do is I need to sort of maybe try to recreate some of the brushes that I use that I don't own, and then at least I'll feel like I've created that brush. And I do want to get into, I've sort of, one of the things I was looking into when I was watching some of those tutorial videos was how to make brushes a little more and stuff like that. So when I get some time, I'm going to focus on that. I've only made, I think, 2 or 3 brushes myself, so I do want to put together a brush pack for you guys at some point. I mean, I wonder how many people just steal brushes and rename them and pass them off as their own, because I don't know. But I feel weird doing that. I'm sure it happens though. Loftman Dark Label, yeah, that'd be fun. So this brush, just the way the watery wet brush works, yeah, it sort of does this weird thing in that it fills like an edge. So it's, I'll zoom in so you can really see what it does. So these wet edges, that's where you sort of start to get that watercolor look. Yeah, it's kind of cool. So as I'm coloring here and adding my shadows, I'm just sort of going into some of these areas. I want to leave some areas light so they pop out, but then the shadows kind of draws some things back in. So I'm thinking about everything as like having a bit of a cast shadow, like think about things in a 3D space, even if it's just a little bit of a shadow. Because again, it's just understanding where your light source is coming from. And I'll be sure I'll put this drawing up on Patreon for you guys, so you can grab the PSD later. So it'll be helpful just to kind of see and break down, if you want, just the layers and things like that after the fact. I'll probably post it Monday. So the one thing about coloring with a watercolor brush is, instead of just a normal fill, like for flat colors, it's a little more time consuming because you have to go in and paint in all the areas, as opposed to just dropping in a fill bucket on a selected area. But it does give it a more sort of hand painted look, especially because you're going to miss little areas here and there. And another cool thing too about Clip Studio is that instead of going to an eraser, because my eraser is like a hard edge or just a, or you can pick like this airbrushed eraser, you can just select the transparency layer and then you can use the same brush texture to erase with, so you can still maintain sort of look. which is handy if I want to kind of go back in and pop out some of these. So yeah, it's a cool little feature. Lots of little neat things. How old are my kids? So my kids, I have 2 boys, and they are 9 and 6. So they run amok and keep my wife very busy when I'm working. Yeah, as my kids grow older, I'm sure I'll lean more into more adult sort of content. I just think it's cool to be able to have, like when you have kids, to be able to share the things you create with them. It's just fun. I need to think about this building's casting a bit of a shadow. So I'm going to be able to get away with not having to do the shadow of the bars. So how do I justify my rates if they give pushback? I don't know if I typically get pushback. Anytime that I have, like for me now, I don't do commissions throughout the year. I only do them for my Kickstarter. So the price is there and people can either pay it or not pay it. And even that, like, you know, when I have those prices for those during my Kickstarter, it's quite a discount from what I would normally charge. I find that like when I do commissions, I just get so much more from freelance work, and I can't really justify those prices just for the average person. So I don't know. I tend to not do too many commissions because of that. But I mean, somebody's going to pay what they're willing to pay, and then you got to charge what you feel your time is worth. So, this just is what it is. But I've never really had any pushback per se. I think people just either don't respond back if I've ever in the past given a quote for something, and especially when it comes to commissions. But I've had plenty of clients decline, when I've given them a budget for something. Like whenever I'm pricing out anything, it's usually just a matter of coming up with how much work is involved, how much time is going to take, is the project something I want to work on. There's a lot of factors that kind of go into it. I've worked on projects sort of for a discounted rate just because I was really interested in working on it. And maybe it's a smaller company and they don't have huge budgets, so you just sort of have to make that decision for yourself. what you're comfortable with. Did my kids inspire my RuneWorld characters? A little bit. There was a few little sort of nods to my kids in the book that are just sort of in there. In the first issue, I have a little kid picking his nose, and that was very much inspired by my youngest, who picks his nose. So, it's kids can be inspiring for sure, and they inspire my work from time to time. Okay, so this is starting to come together. I have most of my shadow done. So the process of coloring, for me, when I'm really breaking things down into flats and shadows and then the texture, it's not that hard. I think some of the execution is the thing that probably is the most challenging for newer artists. It's just kind of understanding the whys, why are you making that choice, and a lot of times it's just sort of I almost kind of sometimes forget the whys. It's just sort of like an automatic thing because it's been drilled into my head. When I understand where to put a shadow, I don't need to think too much about it anymore. I mean, the principle is the same. If you understand where your light sources are and you understand 3D objects, and how light reflects off them, and where shadows are cast. Once you understand that basic understanding, everything else just kind of comes quicker. So I've said it before, when people are asking about what they need to work on, and I always try to emphasize those fundamentals, because at the end of the day it all comes back to that. Okay, so let's see. Just checking another file. So that's looking pretty good. I think because this upper window is bigger, I'm going to do a few little bits of color inside just to kind of give it, there's something else going on in here. Just some shapes, nothing specific. So, anybody else have any other questions? I'm pretty close to wrapping up here. So the last thing that I do is I'm going to sort of finish off this sort of styling thing is I'm going to, on another layer, I'm going to take a little bit of the off-white color and go back to my brush. So I use this, the brush I used for this is something I created, and this brush is one I will share with you guys. Is the 7B pencil brush. So it just gives it a little bit of texture. I sort of enjoyed the look of adding little bits of highlights. It sort of reminds me of back in animation school when we used to do marker renderings, and then we'd take like a white pencil ground and just sort of pop little highlights. Sort of takes me back to that look, so I think that's kind of just where it kind of inspired the look of some of these, how I finished these buildings. It just kind of gives it a little bit of a, and it helps add to that sort of raw, like texture sort of vibe that I'm sort of striving for. Because I used to just take a regular, like, you know, other color and do like a highlight layer and things like that, but yeah, having some grain and stuff on the painting, it sort of, yeah, it just helps give it a little bit of life. I don't know. I've dabbled in watercolors here and there. I'm not great at it, but I've sort of been trying my best to sort of achieve it in my digital work more and more. There's not a lot of great tutorials for Clip Studio for watercolor. There's a few here and there, but nothing I've found that really is super helpful. I think one of the hardest things about tutorials in general is finding somebody who knows how to communicate properly. I'm not great at just talking on a subject. I'm okay just to ramble in here and answer your questions, but putting together a concise sort of lesson plan sort of thing, I find a little more difficult. So I guess that's one of the downsides to the YouTube tutorials. It's just, you know, not everybody's going to be the best at communicating the ideas. And the reason I like to do this on the other top layer is because I can kind of go over the line a little bit here and there. Again, it sort of gives it that feel like if I had a painting and I just took a white pencil crayon to sort of add highlights on like a watercolor painting, it would kind of give it that vibe. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here. Yeah, my coloring process like is pretty quick. Like once I get going, especially if I wasn't yapping, it would be even quicker for this. But a lot of it is because the work has been done before when I've established sort of the look and style previously. The first building I had done was a lot longer just because it was a lot of just trying to figure out what that overall look is going to be, what the tones are going to be. Like when I'm selecting like my tones, one thing I kind of wanted to point out, I try my best, and just sort of like a rule of thumb, I'll make this big as I can. So the rule of thumb is to sort of stay within the center when you're picking colors. I try not to go too saturated if I can help it. Kind of if you're in the middle, like around this area, that's the sort of sweet spot. Like most of these colors, unless you're getting too grays, but any of the actual colors, try to just make sure they don't go beyond that center point. Sometimes for reds you don't have a choice, you kind of have to go, but that one sort of worked out there. But that's sort of just a rule of thumb. I think if you start playing over in this area, it can get dangerous, just for saturation. I mean, it really depends on the look you're going for, but I find like with watercolor sort of approach, definitely don't want to get too saturated, because you can't get that necessarily with watercolor. But I'm doing little highlights here and there. I don't want to do too many in here because this is the kind of a darker area, so it's going to really contrast. I also find just doing these little highlights is kind of nice and relaxing. I'm weird. I'll check out that guy's Matt recommended. Let's see, Adelson Farias on YouTube. I'm always looking for new, people like new tutorials that are helpful. So, feel free to let me know if you know anybody that's good. The language barrier, if he does do it in Portuguese, then might be a bit of a problem for me. But I find that one of the other issues with tutorials on YouTube is a lot of people don't talk during them, and that can be kind of frustrating. You can learn something from just watching people, sort of work, but it helps if they kind of give you little tips as they go. I know I can be bad for that. I have a few videos on there that I don't talk during. But I find the live streams like this are sort of more helpful, just because people are asking questions and it allows me to talk through, but I'm not really, 100% doing a lesson plan here. Few last little highlights on these stones. I gotta do some shadow on the stones as well. I kind of forgot that part. Another thing I find helpful, if you can do it, is to sort of have, when you have your set palette, it's just a lot easier to go back in and reapply the colors quickly without having to kind of find them. So any more questions before I wrap up? I'm just about, I feel like I'm just about done here. Also, for future videos and things like that, feel free to send me a message through Patreon. You can send a personal message or just comment on one of the videos or posts if you have ideas for future stuff. So one of the other things, we were talking about comics a little bit. I really want to, another reason why I really want to start diving into a comic project is that I feel that, that could be something I can share with you guys on Patreon. I'll put it out there at some point just to see what people think, but, possibly putting pages as I go up there. I don't know if people would want the spoilers or not, if that would be a good thing or a bad thing. but I'm sure I could do something where maybe I kind of hide the preview, and if people want to sort of be surprised when it's all done, they can. But let me know what you guys think of that idea if I do finally get the time to dive into a comic and sort of start putting the process, more online. And then I could, it kind of gives me reason to sort of do maybe a live stream where I'm take you through drawing a page, all that goes into it. Yes, I am going to share the PSD. I'll probably post it Monday. After I'm done here, I'll probably, sort of passively tweak a few more things and just sort of explore a few more ideas. But I'll show you real quick. So one of the good things about having the flats, if I go to my flat layer, I check off the apply to connected pixels only, just so I can grab all the red. If I, decided that I want to change the red, I just hit Control U, and then it's just a matter of just, messing with the adjustments. If I want to punch something up or try a different color, if I want to try purples or greens or whatever. And I find that's a lot of, what I'm doing here is if I'm going to tweak the colors after the fact, if I have my flats kind of there already. Another thing to do too is if you're sort of happy with your palette and you just want to experiment, I'll just make a copy, and so I have my original flats down here, and then I can go in and just really mess with another one and not have to worry about, if I went too far or something like that. I can tweak. I also have multiple monitors. I find my Wacom monitor, the colors aren't exactly accurate, so I have a couple other monitors I'll toss this on at some point and just sort of see. And then sometimes even I'll find that I save the image out and then open it on my phone, just to kind of see what it looks like there. Yeah. Anyway, any other questions before I go? Thanks everybody for tuning in, and whoever was able to stick through this whole thing. Hopefully you found some of it helpful. If you have further questions you want to ask me, feel free to send me a message on Patreon or comment in the video, and I'll try to answer that for you. And like I said, if you have ideas for future streams and things you want to see, definitely let me know. And thanks everybody for your support and tuning in. Okay, take care.